Hello, this is a standalone video that explains how to use my character creation assets, a zip of which is included below. So, included in the zip is my character creation sheet, a testing ROM BPS, the player palette patchmaker, paloriginal.png, and palgen.png. Other programs we'll be using are Pal Generator and Graphics Editor, which I have included links for both. We'll first go over the testing ROM since it's the most straightforward. Here I've prepared a playground for you to see all the player sprites in the game. It boots straight into the level so you don't have to go through the title and overworld. In the middle here we have power up blocks so that you can switch between all the different states. On the left here we have various items and objects to try out. The climbing net doesn't have a net so you can examine the character better. We have a spring, as well as water, and a slope, and a wall triangle. On the right, we have custom blocks which manually set Mario's pose number, allowing you to see all the different cutscene sprites, including the castle destruction sequences and the gold tape sequence. You can see that the pose number in the top right reflects this as I go over these different blocks. And speaking of the HUD, you can also press R to switch between Mario and Luigi on the fly. This lets you see all the different palettes. The last thing of note is this block in the middle which sends you to the overworld to test that. Moving on, let's go into the big one, the character creation sheet. The whole point of this sheet is to circumvent working in Graphics Editor or YYCHR as much as possible. The basic idea is that you can just pick a pose and start making your own sprite underneath with the original above for reference. I would highly recommend if you have a sprite to turn on the grid. I have a custom key binding for it so I can toggle it easily, and yeah, let's get started. So the first thing to note is the box colors. As you probably noticed, some of the poses have a darker green behind them and some of them have a lighter green. The darker green is actually for reuse sprites. Instead of making those, you should copy them from the original. Hopefully when a sprite's tileset feature comes out, I can make this automatic, but for now copying will do. And this is a better way to work because working on a walking sprite without seeing the full sprite is a little difficult, and you might have to do extra cleanup later on when you actually see them in game and it doesn't line up right. So I recommend working with the full sprites. This way you know which ones are duplicates that you don't have to redraw. Some of the poses include pink tiles which aren't located in GFX32 but rather GFX0. The number beside them corresponds with this key over on the right, which shows where each 8x8 comes from. The rest of the colors are pretty self-explanatory, and I've included a key to show what goes where. The next thing of note is the player palettes included below. Some of the colors are crossed out, and this is to show that these colors do not change when switching between Mario and Luigi, and are also used by different sprites such as the Monty Mole. To avoid these sprites being weirdly colored, I generally use the 10 colors on the right as to avoid conflicts. Other than black and white, of course, those are generally unchanged. If you do have to use those colors, I would try to use colors that don't change between Mario and Luigi, or try to not edit those colors at all. The two smaller palettes are the overworld palettes. If possible, I would try to use a custom palette on your overworld so that you can use all 16 colors instead of 8. It's also recommended because these colors are also used for things like Yoshi, so editing them will give you some weird colored Yoshis, and you might have to deal with that if you don't have custom palettes. If you want to use the vanilla palette limitations, then these are the 8 colors you have to work with. On Luigi's overworld palette, you can see his skin tone is also used for the background of the player walking sprite in the corner. This makes it really tough to work around. One workaround is to use a patch that changes the tile that's displayed in the corner, or to use something that removes the player entirely, and there's probably various other things that you can think of too. When creating your character, try to be color conscious and stay within the palette limitations. I like to make a copy of this palette and edit it as I go along. This also helps with insertion later. That about covers what this sheet is. Now we're going to use it to actually make a character, and go over the small things people miss when creating them. To start, the victory pose at the top 16 by 16 tile is shifted over 2 pixels when riding Yoshi. This is also true for the small sprite, so take note of this. This frame of the net turning sprite is also used for the Yoshi riding animation, which is why the leg is missing. Adding it back would make both of Mario's legs appear on top of Yoshi. This also means that the net animation is missing a leg, but this is generally obscured by the net itself, so you don't really notice. All brush animation actually uses the wrong hat piece, making it misaligned. Instead, uses the hat piece from the net punching animation. This generally isn't worth fixing as the sprite is seldom used. And finally, the cape animation. People generally skip out on making these because they look complicated, but if you really need to make them, they're not that bad. What we're gonna do is fill in the bottom part, leaving the tiles above alone, as shown here. Now this part above is actually just a combination of this dark green part below. We're going to copy these pieces from the dark green part up into the top. Pay careful attention to where I'm selecting the tiles because they're not perfectly aligned with the grid. This spare Mario head is actually unused, but it's just the head from this pose but without the cape. Generally doesn't hurt to include. Now everything else you should just be able to fill out like normal, take the pose above, redraw it below, and so on. Now we're going to fast forward to a completed sheet, and let's work on putting these tiles in game. Firstly, we need a working palette to open in Graphics Editor. So to do this, we're going to copy and open paloriginal.png and open it in our image editor. Now, we should be able to take the palette we created and put it over Mario's palette. We don't have to worry about the other palettes because we're just using this palette to help insert everything correctly. I'm also going to take the colors from the color key and put them in the blank space, and I'll explain why in a bit. Now we can save this file and open up our PAL generator folder. Take the PAL image and put it in this folder, open palgenerator.exe, and type in the name of the image. This will give us a .pal file for us to be able to use in Graphics Editor. Now open Graphics Editor. First thing we're going to do is open GFX32. I recommend making a copy of your GFX folder in case you need to revert something. Next, we'll press the palette button and press the blue star that says insert, and choose the PAL file we just made. Now copy the green background color by pressing Ctrl left click and right clicking on the first color of the palette. This should make the background color green. If it's not, select Mario's palette from the drop down if you haven't already. And one final thing to set up, go to Options, Image Converters, and make sure it's on nearest color. This is the whole reason why we're using Graphics Editor over YYCHR, this feature right here. Now, let's go back to our working sheet and make a copy of it. I did this by making a new frame in Sprite. Now all we do is just copy over the poses. Look at the poses in GFX32, go select those poses in your editor, press Ctrl X to cut the poses, then Ctrl V to paste them into Graphics Editor. We want to cut instead of copy, this way we know which poses we've already completed. I'm also using Alt-Tab to quickly switch between programs as I go. Know your hotkeys, it'll help you work faster. It may seem a little awkward at first, but eventually you will get into a rhythm. Here are some of the more awkward ones to copy. The middle 8x8 of the diagonal running sprite is reused, so make sure to leave it behind so that you can reuse it again later. Once you get down to the last few pieces, you may want to delete some of the reused pieces to clearly see what's left. The cape tiles are spread out. I would recommend copying the larger cape tiles you recognize first, and then you should be left with the smaller 8x8s, which should be easier to match now that the big ones are gone. This 16x16 square in the cape sprites is actually shifted over by 1 pixel, meaning these 8 pixels are reused in the other 8x8. This is a very easy thing to overlook. Once you're done with GFX file 32, save it and open GFX 0. Here we're going to do the same thing with the remaining 8x8s. First, go to your palette options and change the background color to the pink color instead of the green. Using the numbers and the key on the right, you should be able to find where each 8x8 goes. You can also hover over the tiles in Graphics Editor to see the same number in the corner. Once everything has been copied, congrats, your GFX file is done. Save it and repeat with other GFX files if needed. Now we can insert them with Lunar Magic. The final thing I want to touch on is the player palette patch maker. Using palgen.png, you can edit the colors and drag and drop it onto the program. It'll output an ASM file that, when inserted, will change the global palettes of the players without affecting other global colors. This way, I don't have to deal with shared palettes, and I can insert my players into other ROMs without the fear of changing any other edited colors, which is what I did with this player sprite in Kaizo Kindergarten. The program is made in Love 2D and isn't the best, so it's not very polished. I mainly made it as a development tool for me, but I feel like other people might find use of it. And that about wraps up the tutorial. If you have any questions, feel free to DM me on Twitter at mm102_ or on Discord with the tag on screen. Thanks for watching and have a wonderful C3.